Alrighty, how's it going, YouTube? I'm Kyle. How's it going? And we are going to be doing part two of our video series here on a repertoire for white. So we're going to be looking at 1d4 as our first move, if you don't remember, and knight f3, right? These are kind of like the two key moves that we're going to be seeing in this repertoire. And today we're going to go over last time we went over the Queen's Gambit declined and the Queen's Gambit accepted, which are going to be two of your biggest, defenses that you're going to have to deal with. So, if you haven't watched that video, definitely go back and watch that one. This one, we're going to talk about the Tarrasch defense, the Ragozin defense, and the Vienna defense, or the Vienna variation. And these are all kind of, related in some way to the Queen's Gambit declined, I would say, right? So, first, we're going to talk about the Tarrasch. This is one that, I think, like, if I look at the database, I was looking at the database a lot when I was doing this, and I, don't remember now at this point. Let's see. The Tarrasch. So there's a few ways you can get into the Tarrasch, right? But you're going to usually be starting from this kind of move order. D4, D5, knight F3, knight F6, C4, right? This is usually what we're getting. We get a Queen's Gambit declined position, right? This is our big tabia position. And so we're going to see the Vienna, the we're going to see the Vienna, the Ragozin, and the Tarrasch all come from this position potentially. And we'll also look at a few other, slight differences in the move order, but this is how it's usually going to go. And the Tarrasch is going to be with this move C5, right? So the Tarrasch is anything really with this pawn structure, right? Or I should say anything, where we go for this pawn structure really quickly, right? Sometimes you'll see this pawn structure come up later. It's not really a Tarrasch at that point, but yeah, this is what we would call the Tarrasch. This is specifically the semi-Tarrasch. If we take here on d5, which is what we're always going to do with the Tarrasch, by the way. We're going to take on d5, and if they take with the knight, this is the semi-Tarrasch. So the semi-Tarrasch is kind of similar, you can think of it to, say, like the Grunfeld main lines. So the idea here is we're going to play e4, since they've taken back with their knight, right? And this is going to force a trade on c3, right? This is kind of the thing to keep in mind, is that they really want to trade on c3. If they don't trade on c3 and they go back to b6, it's kind of a misplaced knight. It's not really supposed to be there. And yeah, it's going to be not very helpful for them. And they're going to struggle with that knight on that square. So almost always you don't see players doing that. And then usually we have a trade here. Bishop b4 check, bishop d2, trading the bishops. And this is kind of the position you'll get, I don't know, maybe 95% of the time. You're going to get this a lot with the semi-Tarrasch. And that's kind of the nice thing with the semi-Tarrasch, is you really just have to kind of know this specific structure, this specific position, because like in terms of sidelines and things, there's not really anything to worry about. Most of it's fairly forcing, right? So you're going to go down this line almost guaranteed. If your opponent plays this, you're going to get to this position. The main thing to think of here is the fact that we have an extra pawn in the center. So that's going to be nice. That's going to help us attack in the center. It's going to help us sometimes with kingside attacks. Meanwhile, though, black has a 2-1 pawn majority on the queen side, which could be a problem in some endgames, right? Maybe they're going to get a passed pawn, and, maybe your king's over on g1, and they've got a pawn, over on the b file, or even the a file, right? Just running down the board. Your king's kind of far away. So you always have to be a little bit careful of that in the endgame, right? That's going to be something to kind of balance the position out, right? It can't all be positives for white. But white's typically just going to play something like bishop d3, or even e2, or even c4. I think usually what I go for as white is bishop c4. That tends to be one of the more reliable moves here. And then you just castle kingside, and you just have a perfectly acceptable position, right? D5 is an important move to remember. Also E5 sometimes, right? So it's going to depend. But yeah, oftentimes you just get a good central or kingside attack without too much risk, which is why I kind of like this for white. This was really popular for a little bit for black, but yeah, it's not really that dangerous of an opening. It's more like black's trying to play very solid here, right? So going back, yeah, that's one way they can do this. But let's look at the more typical Tarrasch ways, right? Because this is what you'll probably even see a bit more of. Something like e takes d5. So this is a very typical Tarrasch defense position. Not a semi-Tarrasch anymore. This is just a Tarrasch. We want to pin the knight, right? And what's going to end up happening here oftentimes is that this d5 pawn for our opponent is going to become an isolated queen's pawn. So that's going to mean, especially for all those players who really like to defend as white, or just play kind of solidly and build up the pressure on your opponent, this is going to be a big deal, right? Is this pawn just being on its own, these are the kind of positions that we really like, yeah, if you're that type of player, right? So, bishop e6 is pretty typical. You can play e3 here. There's a game in the database that I went ahead and added to the study. By the way, if you're not following this study, it's on Lead Chess. And I'm going to put the link in the description of this video. Go ahead and check that out because, yeah, it helps out the channel. It helps out, helps me out, right? And it's going to go into a lot more detail than what you're going to see in just this video, for example. So yeah, this is actually following a game Lasker versus Janowski in the 1910 World Championship. Janowski got crushed in this game, and he got crushed overall in the World Championship there. He didn't win a single game. He didn't even draw that many games. It was one of the most one-sided World Championships ever. So keep that in mind here. Like, this is a good position for white, and yeah, black might just implode if they're not careful, right? But that's a fun game to go look at afterwards. So going back, another thing is maybe just the more calm bishop e7. The problem with bishop e7 is we can take on c5, and now if they take back with the bishop, we can actually take on f6, and we're going to win a pawn. So this is the kind of thing that black actually has to be a bit careful of tactical shots like this early on even. Going back, okay, another idea is c takes d4. C takes d4, though, we just take back with our knight. And this is really key, is to put this knight on d4 once there's the isolated queen's pawn here. By the way, if, me talking about isolated queen's pawn, you're thinking, like, what is he talking about? I'm very confused here. Well, just keep in mind, right, that there's a lot of videos online about isolated queen's pawns. There's a lot of material. And any of those resources, if you look them up and you watch them, they're going to help you a lot with this kind of position, with the Tarrasch defense, playing against it, right? Or playing as it, right? So, yeah, I'm, of course, just talking about the opening, but in terms of the middle game stuff, that's going to be really helpful to kind of improve your understanding of these positions. But yeah, we really like the knight on d4. I'll just say that, right? The knight is a really good blockader of this pawn, and we can just kind of hold it in place and then later target and destroy it. And then we'll just be a pawn up, right? That's kind of the key, So going back, there are other move orders, though. So if we go back here, say they start with e6 and then c5, right? This is referred to in the database as the pseudo-Tarrasch. I guess the only difference is we have a knight on f3 instead of c3. That kind of changes some things, right? But mainly, we're going to play the same way. We're going to take on d5. They're going to take back, almost certainly. We're going to play knight c3, and then we're basically just in a mainline Tarrasch now. Knight to c6 is very, very common. And here there's a few different moves that you can play. You can play, g3. You can play, even like bishop f4, I've played in the past. There's a few different things, but what I actually like here is to take on c5, which already threatens just to win a pawn, right? And so, yeah, if black's not careful, say they just take it back, well, then we win this pawn, right? They could play knight f6, but then they get into some trouble, maybe we're going to be able to hold on to our pawn. So this is, you know, a little bit annoying for black. We've maybe won a pawn. D4 is the main line. And D4 is a little annoying, actually, and this is why, you know, you don't always see D takes C4, D takes C5 played that much. But this actually leads to good positions for white as well, right? We play knight A4, and they black actually has a nice tactical shot here. Knight bishop takes, and so it kind of looks weird, right? Like, wait, I just defended that, and then you took it, right? Well, the idea, of course, is queen A5 check, and now the knight is hanging, and so something like this happens. Problem for black here, though, is that we're gaining a lot of time. We can play rook c1. We've already got our bishop out a little bit. We've got a knight out. We're getting our rook out. We're going to be able to move our queen very easily. And this queen's getting chased around a bit, right? And this pawn could be a little bit weak. And in fact, after something like queen b6, e3 is a really strong move for white, actually. You know, after they trade on e3, we're going to take back with our bishop. We're going to attack their queen. They're not castled. We're getting castled pretty quickly. And yeah, I mean, if black is really greedy and just keeps grabbing pawns, right, they could get into a lot of trouble, actually. So this is actually a pretty nice position. And one thing to keep in mind is that, you know, you're kind of avoiding the types of positions your opponent might want here, right? Your opponent might want to be the attacker as black. You know, that might be why they're playing the Tarrasch defense. That might be why they have this isolated queen's pawn. So if we, so if we, you know, are doing this as white, black could be really not so happy, right? They're going to be looking at this like, oh, now I have to defend, right? You know, they might not like defending, right? And yeah, I mean, I mentioned Emanuel Lasker earlier, right? That's kind of the whole philosophy that he had is get your opponent into a position that they don't want to be in, that they don't like, even if it's not necessarily the best position, right? It's going to be the best position to play against a human, right? So this is probably going to be a bit annoying for your opponents oftentimes. Going back, and we're not risking that much either. We're getting a good attacking position without risk. I mean, you know, what's there to not like? So going back, that is, I think I'm going to leave it there. That's kind of the key things to remember with the Tarrasch defense, right? Oftentimes there will be an isolated queen's pawn. You know, there might be some early tactical stuff as we saw. And oftentimes we're just trying to be up a pawn, although there is that one position we just looked at where we're actually saying, hey, black, do you want to be up a pawn? But I will get compensation and be able to play very aggressively early on. And like I said, we're not even risking that much in that position. So black is going to be, you know, probably not too happy. All right, so let's move on now. Let's go to the Ragozin chapter. The Ragozin is another really popular one. I think the Ragozin's even more popular. It's going to come out of our tabia position again, right? Knight c3 here. Yeah, the most popular move here, right? Which is a little surprising. I thought that bishop e7, the Queen's Gambit declined, which we looked at in the last video, would be the most popular, but in fact, bishop b4, the Ragozin, is the most popular. One thing to keep in mind, sometimes this will come out of a different move order. So going back here, your opponent might play knight f6, right? We will continue the same, knight f3. They might play e6, and then after c4, your opponent could play d5 going into the Queen's Gambit declined that way, and then after knight c3, they'll pin us, right? So that's an idea. One thing to keep in mind is our move order avoids something called the Nimzo-Indian, right? Where they can, you know, after knight f6, knight f3, e6, c4, right? If we had a knight on c3, they could pin it with bishop e4. They can't do it here. And so they might play something like the Bogo Indian, which is playing bishop b4 check anyway, even though there's not a knight in the way. And then we get some better options. That's something we're going to look at in a later video. But The Ragozin is very related to that opening, right? It's very similar. Uh, the difference, of course, being the fact that, oftentimes black is trying to hold back on their d pawn, right? And they get some flexibility as black in the Nimzo-Indian, and that kind of can be a big part of why it's a tough opening to crack, right? With the Ragozin, they've already committed to the central idea here, and so with this pawn on d5, what we can do is we can just take it, right? And there's a few options. This bishop on b4 is even sometimes a tactical liability. Like we have queen a4 check is a very popular line. But I'm going to recommend a line which is a little bit less about, putting our opponent under immediate tactical pressure and is a lot more about just getting a good positional kind of setup. And oftentimes we can still play pretty aggressively. We'll see. So pawn takes. If the pawn takes back, this is probably what you should do as black. But there's some other options. Knight takes is actually very popular. I think, yeah, it's almost as popular as e takes. But it's a little inaccurate because bishop d2 now. And, what is black doing exactly, right? If you castle, we can play e4 and we can get a position very similar to what we just saw, right, with the semi-Tarrasch, right? But the semi-Tarrasch, you trade the bishops, right? Here you're not able to trade the bishops, and you're losing a tempo. So this is not very good. Something like bishop d3, and we're looking to maybe play e5. We're looking at maybe a very strong kingside attack in a lot of cases. So going back, that's like best play, and it's not even that great. Knight takes is also a thing, but again, you lose tempo, and e4 gets played, right? And surprise, surprise, right? This also happens here, right? So yeah, this tends to be pretty nice for white already. Going back, queen takes is a weird move, but it is possible. E3, and you can just play bishop d2, and you should be fine, right? It's a little bit of a weird move to take with your queen. They're just taking advantage of the pin, but it's the kind of thing where, like, in my mind, I'm looking at it like, okay, you're taking advantage of the pin, but it almost feels like you're just doing it to do it, not because it's good, right? So yeah, we'll see. Just like in the Queen's Gambit accepted lines, right, that we saw in the last video, sometimes we're going to have to trap our bishop for a little bit. Going back, bishop takes right away is perfectly fine, but knight takes does get hit with e4, and this knight, if it takes on c3, gets trapped. So keep that in mind. There's a little tactical trick there. Going back, yeah, let's look at the main line, right? Pawn takes. This is, yeah, what you're going to get in a lot of games, and yeah, you're going to get this in almost half of your games here, right? And then the rest are those other moves, which tend to not be very good. But pawn takes, we can now pin the knight. And so we've gotten our bishop out without playing e3, right? Castles is very likely. e3. c6 is most popular amateur level. This tends to be not super dangerous. You can just play bishop d3. You can probably castle soon. One thing that can even happen is something like bishop g4. This is, I think, the most popular move here. It's like black, just likes pinning knights, right? But now you get queen b3, and there's an issue on b7. So, these tend to actually work out pretty well for white. So going back, okay, c5 is the most popular master level. If I look at the database, yeah, it's actually pretty far down the list of moves that that black is playing at amateur level on Lichess, right? But the thing with this is we can just take it. Something like bishop takes, pawn takes, we get kind of a weird, like shattered pawn structure. But we have the bishop pair, and we have a pretty nice position overall still, right? It's not such a big deal. It's not the end of the world, right? You might look at this and say, ugh, I really don't like this very much. But, white is still doing fine here. So just keep that in mind, right? Going back, knight b to d7 is more popular, rook c1. There's a really wild line here to know, which is queen a5, a3, bishop takes, rook takes. You might be thinking, wait a second, my rook is pinned. This is horrible. Knight e4, what are we doing? b4. And the point is, after knight takes, queen a1, queen takes c3. And this is actually a really strong exchange sacrifice. We now have an extra pawn on the queen side. Our opponent has an isolated queen's pawn. We have the bishop pair. And we have easy development. We're about to castle. So there's actually a lot of benefits to this for white. And this actually scores really well at master level. So keep that in mind. You might look at this and think, this looks a little, not so great for white. But in fact, white is doing really, really well here. So just keep that in mind. It's the kind of position where maybe you get a little scared because you're down material. But yeah, we're not even down that much material, right? We're going to probably win that d pawn at some point. So going back, I mean, that's the kind of position you probably won't have to play that often, but that's a position that shows up at master level. And that's kind of the thing sometimes, right? Is, you might not have to play it very much at amateur level, but when you do, you really should know it, or else you could get into, a lot of trouble. So definitely don't ignore this line, even though it's not super popular. h6. This is another thing you might see, h6. Something like bishop g4. We could play this queen b3 idea again. Takes. And yeah, sometimes you can take that b7 pawn, sometimes you can't. So you have to be careful, right? But this is a pawn structure that we oftentimes get here, where we're very strong in the light squares. We're going to have the bishop pair, right? And by the way, if they ever take on c3, you can just take back, and you're considering playing rook g1, and you might have a really strong kingside attack there. You don't even have to castle, right? So keep that in mind. There's some very interesting dynamic positions here, where again, like we're seeing in a lot of these scenarios, white's not really risking a lot. White is playing a fairly safe game, but still getting some good attacking chances if black's not careful. Going back, I do want to spend a good amount of time on this because this is one of the openings that you will see the most. Yes. If they play h6 right away, we're going to drop back. There is a move here, g5. This is actually the most popular move at the amateur level. And this is a very interesting move. It's a very aggressive move. The idea is to play knight e4. And when I was looking at this, actually, I found some really old games where Mikhail Botvinnik was playing this as white. And he had a really nice game where he played knight to d2. Oh, and I mentioned here in the study that not that many players find this in the database as white. So, black might even be a little surprised if you play this, right? The point though is after knight takes, we can take back, bishop takes. Might seem not so great, but the thing is here we're actually skewering this bishop to the c7 square with the help of our bishop. And so again, we're maybe losing a little material, but we're getting a really aggressive attacking position. Black has not really done that much in terms of development. In terms of king safety, there's really not going to be a safe square for this king. Another thing that you might see, maybe this is the thing I'm thinking of, is this sort of trade sometimes happens. And again, okay, we've lost our bishop pair here, one of the few cases where we are having that happen, but there's pressure on h6. You still can't castle as black. What are you doing, right? If e3 is played, then the bishop on f1 is released, and the queen is released to h5 even. So black can get into a lot of trouble here very easily with really, not doing anything super, like, out of control, right? It's not like black is taking all these unnecessary risks and then losing, right? Just to show you a little more of this line, Bishop a5 is probably best, but we can play h4 here. And I think this is what I'm remembering from the Bot Bennett game, is that h4 is really aggressive, right? This was the idea he had. g4, e3, and in some cases, say bishop f5, you can go bishop e2 and try and win this pawn. They still, of course, will probably play h5, but we're getting good development, and yeah, we're only down, very small amount of material. This is just a good position for white. And white is going to be able to have a very safe king. Meanwhile, black really can never have a safe king in these positions. So that's kind of the thing I want you to keep in mind, is that sometimes you have to play a little bit more dynamically against this, because this is a very solid setup for black, but the kind of compensation you will oftentimes get is compensation that, yeah, your opponent is just going to really struggle dealing with, right? You're gonna get compensation where, black will be in trouble for a long time, perhaps, right? You're gonna have compensation way out there, right? Like for the next 20 moves, right? Going back, I think that's all we'll look at for this. But yeah, the Ragozin, it's a very interesting one. And these setups tend to be not too dangerous for white, especially if black doesn't know what they're doing. If black is just playing it safe, right, and they're just kind of doing normal stuff, like we see usually happens actually, is something like castles e3 and then like c6, right? Like this is very common. You're going to be fine as white, right? There's really not even that much of a risk going on, right? So these are just typical like Queen's Gambit decline type positions. All right, let's move on to the Vienna. This is going to be the fastest one because this is actually a opening that is very similar to these other, to the Ragozin specifically. Comes from this Tabia position again in the Queen's Gambit declined, but it's just not very popular. It's something like, yeah, 5% of games in the database that I'm looking at. But yeah, it's an opening that is a serious variation that you should look into, right, and be aware of. But yeah, it's just not played very much. So the thing to know is it's kind of like a delayed Queen's Gambit accepted, right? D takes c4. This is the Vienna. And there's a lot of things you could play here. What I'm going to recommend is actually a rare move. A lot of times white is playing e4 at master level, trying to play very aggressively, very trying to get, the maximum amount of advantage here. But yeah, from the practical side of things, I don't think we should be putting in a ton of study into an opening that's going to only encompass, a small percentage of our games. And so my recommendation is actually play something that at amateur level is only played 1% of the time here. It's a perfectly good move, though. Queen a5 check, or a4 check. Queen a5 check would be illegal in multiple ways, but queen a4 check is the idea. And actually, most of the time, black just plays something like bishop d7, which, I said in the study, I think this is almost an inaccuracy from black. We just take back, and these positions are fine. We can play e4 very early on, bishop d3. We just get a nice position, and yeah, black could get into trouble here, actually, if they're not careful. Kind of similar to some of the other positions we've seen already, but especially in the Tarrasch, like the semi-Tarrasch, where we get e4 in. Kind of similar to that, except there's more pieces on the board, and that's kind of dangerous for black, right? That's kind of the point of the semi-Tarrasch, is to get rid of some of those pieces so that we're not in danger with this, big center for white, right? This is a little bit scary for black. If we go back, there are other ways to block this, right? You could block it with c6. We just take. b5 is the thing, but after queen d4, we're doing fine. We have e4, we have a4. These are both ideas. There's actually a Karpov-Kasparov game in the database that ended in a draw here, but yeah, black could get into trouble if they're not careful, right? Going back, but that's kind of just to show how this isn't just some random move, right? If Karpov played against Kasparov, his greatest rival, right? These were the top 2 rated players in the world for a long time. Really strong players, and clearly for a long time the 2 best chess players out there. And yeah, Karpov said, "Let me play Queen A4 check." That's a perfectly fine move here, right? Maybe not the move that puts the most pressure on black, but it's still, especially if your opponent hasn't seen it that much, kind of the idea is your opponent's trying to surprise you with d takes c, perhaps, but then you're surprising them actually with Queen A4 check, and now they're like scratching their head, right? Because they've only seen it in 1% of their games, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. Knight b to d7 is another idea. You can play e4 right away here. It's actually not quite as good to take on c4 first here, but we will take on c4 soon. One thing to point out, b5 does not work because there's a pin on this a pawn, right? So, but keep in mind it might work later, so, be careful. And then, okay, knight c6 is another one. Here we can just take again. And yeah, something like knight to b4, right? We just deal with it by playing queen b3. No problem there at all. So yeah, kind of the idea with this is that we're oftentimes just staying pretty solid as white. I didn't even add that much to the study here. We've really gone over most of the moves that were possible for black, but yeah, this tends to be just very solid. We still have plenty of room to play for a win, and you're going to be surprising your opponent. So that could already get them into a little bit of trouble potentially. So yeah, that is the Vienna. Next time we're going to move on to the Slav, and I think I don't know. I think we'll look at the Slav and the semi-Slav together. These are 2 big ones as well. If we go back, right, in this position, c6 is the second most popular move, right? And so it's actually more popular than one of the first ones we went over, the Queen's Gambit accepted, right? So that's going to be a big one. I hope to get that video out pretty quickly. I know there was a big gap between the first video and the second video, but yeah, they're going to be coming faster now. I got a haircut, so that's helping. Alrighty, that does it for this video. I will see you guys in the next one.